Joey tries to cut some of stuff.
He doesn't eat meat. You don't eat no meat. No. He doesn't eat meat. What do you mean you don't eat no meat? Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I make lamb.
So is lamb a vegetable? Hello shepherds, welcome back. And if you're new here, hello. This is where we talk all things sheepy. My name's Megan, and for spooky season, we're diving into one of the most bizarre and fascinating legendary lambs that may still have an impact on how people still perceive lamb today. What if I told you that for over 400 years, European scholars, naturalists, and religious authorities alike debated whether certain lambs were actually vegetables? That's right, in an alternate universe or time period, Vola's logic could have been supported by the leading authorities of the time. Picture this, it's 14th century medieval England, and the travelers are returning from distant lands of Central Asia with these really incredible stories. They're talking about a creature that's somehow both a plant and an animal. It grows from the earth, it has a long umbilical-like cord, it's anchored to the ground, and it grazes on the plants around it until the earth goes bare and then it dies. This is the vegetable lamb of Tartary, also known as the Baromeds or the Baromeds or the Scythian lamb. And for centuries, European scholars genuinely debated whether this was real or not. Okay, so now you may laugh, but remember when the scientists described the platypus and everyone laughed then, and years later they found out it was true? So how did this legend take root, and what were the people actually seeing? And why did some of the brightest minds of the medieval world believe it? While we chat about the nature of lambs and if there's truly a vegetable-based sheep, let's make some woolly bread. Is it wool? Is it bread? Only one way to find out. I'll have the recipe in the description too. So let's go ahead and bake together and talk about our lamb. One of the more recent-ish books on the subject was written in 1887 by Henry Lee, which I'm sourcing from heavily. He knows that the first written story about the vegetable lamb directly dates back to the reign of Edward III, between 1312 and 1337. This seems to be when the legendary lamb was first brought into public light or common awareness. Sir John Mandeville gave a detailed description, not only witnessing the sheep-plant hybrid, but also eating it. So what could this plant-based lamb be? And how did this myth spread? And why did so many people believe it for so long? Well, there are several descriptions, as well as first-hand accounts describing this lamb of Tartary. But for the most part, it's described as having meat that tastes a lot like crawdads or fish or even ambrosia, which might be similar to umami in modern terms. But it's also described as sweet, like honey. And when you cut the plant lamb, it will bleed with blood. So very unplant-like, very animal-like. Not only that, but this is a ferocious lamb, where it will cut you if you try and approach it. And there are several texts describing how to harvest its wool and meat. You need to first shoot it with arrows from a distance, or wait until it dies. So people of that time debated its wonders, called for some temperance, others further exploration. But first, let's dive even deeper in time. Before Sir John Mandeville's report, rumors persisted from reputable sources, such as Alexander the Great's generals, several of which describe a local tree that bears flocks or bunches of wool that the locals would card and make the wool garments of varying qualities. Pliny recounted various wool-like producing plants as well, but most of the people of the time agreed that the vegetable lamb or plant wool products came from the far-off regions of what is now Russia, India, and Asia. There were several complaints from that time period about how difficult it was to verify these rumors, and how there was always someone to agree that it does exist, but when trying to locate it, it was always just a further ways. And in such a case as the barnacle geese, another famed plant-animal hybrid, were to find the host tree, if you will, of this well-known plant-animal hybrid of the time period, the researchers were always told, not here, just a little bit more north. So going back to Henry Lee, he goes on to write in his book tracing the pathways of the legend and legacy of several folks searching, from monks to members of the East India Company, traveling around in search of this rare and valuable product. Throughout the centuries, there were reports of people wearing fine cloth made from this rare wool, how it grows from trees, from seeds, or is that gourds? There were several local names for the product, but Latin names didn't exist at this time, and so some people called it the Scythian lamb, whereas others called it the Baromeds or Boromeds. And not only that, there were several others who counted that their brushes with this fabled lamb, all describing a similar creature as a gourd or seed-like plant that a lamb-like animal emerges from. So what were people actually seeing? And what creature or plant was actually creating this legend? Well, we have a few likely culprits, and when you see them, it starts to make a lot more sense. Imagine you're a medieval forensic sketch artist, and you're reading people's tales and descriptions of this legendary lamb plant. Some descriptions may say it's wool-like, but from a plant. Other translations say it's more lamb-like than plant-like. And then there's also evidence that some folks maybe, possibly, or definitely knew this was not an actual mythical lamb, but kept the legend alive anyways. It's the unicorn horn fiasco all over again. Because if people think this rare wool comes from these rare magical lamb plants that only grow in faraway lands of Tartary, they're gonna value it far more and pay top dollar. Back then, you may not have had name brands, but did you source your wool from the Garden of Eden? Ugh, shaking my head. And so you draw your best render, noting that there's nothing like this in the medieval Europe during this time period, and you come up with the beautiful art we have today. So now to the source of our legend. We have 2 or 3 main culprits. The first was a fetus of a lamb. The argument being mostly, in my opinion, racism, in that the reason was that the people of that region would totally do that to sheep because they were just barbaric. The next culprit we have is a fern rhizome, or a long rootstock of a fern of the genus Dicksonia. And lastly, but not leastly, cotton. If you've grown cotton, it's pretty fun, really. And reading the tales, some of it's easy to see why they said some things. It can be difficult to describe something to someone who's never seen cotton growing before. And funny enough, the cotton descriptions that go back to even the Roman times, with the several Alexander generals describing the plants, they describe the plants, the process, harvesting, and working the product pretty accurately. So why did some of the brightest minds of the medieval world believe it? Because here's the interesting thing. Given their framework for understanding the world, believing in the vegetable lamb actually makes perfect sense. Looking back at it now, it can look funny and absurd, but the classification system in the medieval world worked completely different, and there was already a precedence towards accepting this with other animals, both for cultural reasons but also religious reasons. Remember the barnacle goose I mentioned earlier? There's a longer story about this, but in short, there is a real and official belief that this specific goose came from either barnacles attached to driftwood or to trees, which meant that this is a sea creature, or aka fish. The local folks could eat them during Lent, which normally forbade eating meat, but this didn't count as meat. So just like the barnacle goose, imagine you really loved the taste of lamb, or mutton, and if only you didn't have to fast. Or hey, meat without guilt. Sounds familiar? Maybe sometimes people just want to believe, and that's enough of a reason. Also, travel was crazy rough back then. In that economy, people did bring back specimens, and they didn't have AI slop, but fact-checking was still so much rougher back then. What do you think? Especially given our modern context, is it so hard to believe that many medieval folks believe that not only could you have lamb that doesn't count as meat, but also it comes from a plant? Does chocolate milk come from a brown cow? I don't know. So when did people start to change their minds? And when did people stop believing? Change can be a long and slow process. Though there's always skeptics, it was hard to prove or disprove until about several hundred years later during the age of discovery or the age of exploration. As more people got to travel and experience the furthest corners of the world, books became more than something for just the rich, and folks shared their knowledge and discoveries. The legend waned, but not until about the mid-1600s, when cotton plants became more commonly grown throughout the European continent, did people get to see with their own eyes where this lamb-like wool came from. Zoos, museums, and gardens all help educate the masses. So what do you think? What are some of your favorite lammy legends? Also, for the taste test on this bread, it kind of reminds me of canned biscuits. It has a faintly familiar flavor, so let me know if you try it out and what it reminds you of. It's definitely better warm than cold, and it reheats well. So is this wool or is it bread? I'm leaning towards bread, but the jury's still out. I need someone to cooperate. I hope you enjoy your spooky day, and may the candy bars be full size and tummy aches stay away. And don't forget, I appreciate you. And if you made it this far, thank you so much. Stay soft, stay fluffy, and most of all, stay true to you.